Hi, my name is Steve Charette, and today I'm going to be giving my talk on what I refer to as the power of a definition. During the course of this semester, I've discussed at length the ideas of context, cultural relativism, and universality. To me, these three concepts are of paramount importance to the translation of rights in today's increasingly global world. The development of international governmental bodies has coincided with a push for universal rights for all. As an international studies major, this pursuit for global rights has been a topic of particular interest to me. Specifically, I've been interested in the tensions that I have found to exist between cultural relativism and the translation of universal human rights. The idea that contextual differences between cultures can act as a barrier to universal translation was first illustrated to me in the Words Without Borders piece, "This Country Must Break Apart." This article describes the detrimental effects that the incorporation of foreign economic models had upon local Chinese people and their culture. After reading This Country Must Break Apart, I began to think about cultural relativism, context, and translation in terms of one word: need. I based my initial research in this course off of these ideas of need and context, with my background in foreign policy providing much of the drive to continue to research the topic. I became particularly invested in the idea of universal laws actually existing in today's globalized world. This idea fueled my thoughts as I read Lydia Lu's Translating the Universal, which is a piece that helped me organize my theoretical thoughts and questions and apply them to real-world settings. The following quote, which reads, "The spread of universal knowledge also means overcoming the resistance of local languages," reinforced my ideas of the possibility of universal ideas in a world where contextual differences in language, history, and culture are so important. With all the differences and problems and needs between cultures, are universal rights even possible? Or does the attempt to force universal rights upon a culture, regardless of their actual need, end up being more detrimental than helpful from a human rights standpoint? Now, it is obvious that at this point in the progression of my thoughts, that my ideas on translation were scattered in numerous directions. My discourses on context, need, and translation kept me perpetually dancing around numerous questions, all revolving what essentially amounted to the age-old debate of cultural relativism versus universality. What I was lacking was that key piece, or that spark, if you will, to fuel my train of thought and provide some type of answer to the questions I had been asking myself. For me, my turning point in the course occurred upon my viewing of Gene M. Hubbard's paper, Translating Slavery, Translating Freedom. His paper dealt with the movement of slaves through nations with slavery and nations without it. I recall one line in particular that stood out to me, which reads, "We are in a world in which we can jump from a nation with slavery to a nation with freedom, and back to a nation with slavery, and then to a nation with freedom. And when you jump from one to the other, how do you protect it?" The importance of this statement to me cannot be stressed enough. From it, all my questions pertaining to context, need, universality, globalization, etc., all became conflated into one notion: the translation of an idea, and in particular, the manner in which ideas are defined. I began to ask myself, how can an idea or practice be translated into a nation that has a different notion or no notion of all of that idea? What impact can a definition of a word have upon an idea or its translation? Can a definition prohibit a translation or advance one? Hubbard used differences in the way that nations define terms such as slavery and freedom to prompt these questions. However, to explore these questions further, I'm going to look at the international human rights issue of human trafficking. We've discussed many abstract concepts in this class, yet I feel that human trafficking is a real issue that clearly illustrates the impact of definitions of words and ideas can have upon the translation of human rights. To begin, I'll start by asking, when you think of human trafficking, what comes to mind? How would you define it? Do popular Hollywood movies come to your mind, which portray the abduction and sale of people for prostitution and profit? In your definition of trafficking, who are the victims? Are they white, middle-class women forced into slavery against their will? And continuing along the same note, who are the perpetrators, or the bad guys, if you will? Some foreign sophisticated person, a collective and advanced black market organization? Well, if any of these images came to mind, then congratulations. You are not only on par with the Hollywood portrayal of human trafficking, but also the United Nations definition. This definition of human trafficking is taken directly from the United Nations. I highlighted key points, yet as you can see, it is a very long and wordy definition. However, it can be conceptually broken up into three main parts. First, you have the act of being trafficked, which, as you can see, the UN defines as some form of recruitment of people by an outside party. The second, you have the means of trafficking or some form of direct force, and the purpose, or primarily the sexual exploitation of direct slavery. Okay, so this definition seems to be a comprehensive and informed attempt by the United Nations to stop international human trafficking. Yet, the number of people in modern-day slavery across the world still totals over 27 million, while 800,000 people are trafficked across international borders every year throughout 161 different countries. These numbers are staggering, and to sum it up, the international community has failed in its attempt to stop human trafficking. So you may ask, why is this? Why have they failed? Well, when looking at international trafficking policies, it can be seen that they put almost all their emphasis on defining trafficking in terms of direct force sex work and slavery from one person or group to another. These violations certainly do exist in places throughout the world. However, are they the primary violations that occur in regards to human trafficking, or does the current definition not address the correct issues? To answer this question, I want to draw attention to the book Gridlock by Pardis Mahdavi. Gridlock is an excellent novel that offers extensive discourses on the stereotypes that exist in anti-trafficking policies. Mahdavi argues that the majority of trafficking is not a result of direct force and does not pertain to sex work, prostitution, or direct slavery. Therefore, international policies that look to solely define, frame, and tailor the trafficking responses to these issues fail because the actual anti-trafficking needs are not being taken into consideration. Mahdavi instead defines trafficking as a labor issue. She asserts in this quote that if we look at trafficking as an issue of migration or labor gone awry, we can see the need to frame the concept within the conversations about migration and forced labor. Moreover, it is time to move away from the sexualized criminalization framework of current policies. To summarize her work, international workers fall victims to poor economic policies and corruption. They are trafficked by structural inequalities, not by direct force. She asserts that the UN's failure to correctly define trafficking in this manner has rendered them unable to reduce trafficking violations. Is she right? Are definitions really that powerful? Does the definition of a violation, such as trafficking, have such a drastic effect on the international response to it? If so, will changing these definitions really have such a drastic effect? To illustrate this point and these questions I just prompted, I want to briefly draw attention to just a few of the many real case studies of global human trafficking. First, in Juarez, Mexico, thousands of women work in factories known as maquiladoras. These women suffer from low wages, long hours, and no benefits. Due to their working conditions and pay, they are forced to live in destitute and dangerous areas, and many fall victim to violence as a result. However, their predicament is the result of NAFTA free trade policies, cheap labor agreements, and systematic corruption within Juarez. They were not directly abducted, taken, or forced into employment. Their trafficking was born out of poverty, necessity, and economic imperialism. Therefore, they technically do not fall under the United Nations definition of human trafficking. Another example is Brazil. In Brazil, over 25,000 workers fall victim to what essentially amounts to slave labor. They work long hours and their pay is often totally withheld. Yet these people are not directly coerced into their situation either. Instead, they are victims of global trade policies, unequal land distribution in Brazil, and corruption within the Brazilian timber industry. Their work is trafficked by circumstance and the inequalities within their economic system, rather than forced by an outside party. So they too do not fall under the protection of the United Nations definition of human trafficking. These are just two examples of many that show how global or universal responses to human rights violations, in this case human trafficking, often fail in their translation. What is the reason? It does not appear to be cultural relativism, as both the Spanish and Portuguese languages, which had no previous word for the concept of human trafficking, have adopted the same definition as the United Nations. Is the reason the definition of trafficking itself? Have there specific needs or issues that need to be addressed in each situation been lost in the attempt to apply international definitions? In this case, anti-trafficking policies were tailored to address a certain definition of human trafficking, and appear to have failed to eliminate the problem when local violations occurred outside of this universally accepted definition of the United Nations. These examples bring us back to the question of specific needs and definitions as they pertain to universal translation. With all the differences in definitions and ideas in today's world, Are universal definitions possible or even desirable? Is it feasible to have a one-size-fits-all approach to human rights issues? And how powerful is a definition? The question of universal translation versus need-based translation is one that has been discussed at length during the course of this semester. It may be impossible to completely answer my questions, yet to look at one issue, human trafficking, shows that clearly there are at least some barriers presented in the translation when the definitions of rights, words, and ideas come into play. To conclude, since the definition of one word, trafficking, has been shown to play such a major role in the translation of human rights, how imperative is it to address specific needs and ideas between cultures? Should universal attempts at translation still be the main approach to take, or should a new emphasis be instead put upon the individual definitions of ideas and words between cultures? Thank you for your time.